mean, imagine the chaotic, just blindingly bright environment of a hospital emergency room at like 3 a.m.
Oh, yeah. Never a calm place.
Right. And a trauma patient is rushed through the double doors. The situation is as dire as humanly possible, really. The patient has taken a bullet directly to the head.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Standard medical protocol kicks in. You expect immediate neurosurgery, a medically induced coma, weeks or maybe months in the ICU.
assuming the patient even survives the night at all.
Exactly, assuming they survive.
Because the biological reality of a penetrating brain injury usually dictates this massive cascade of swelling, bleeding, and just catastrophic tissue damage. I mean, even a grazing wound requires extensive observation.
Totally. And yet, this particular patient doesn't go to the ICU. He doesn't spend months in rehab learning how to speak again. He's treated, and then he literally walks out of the exact same hospital on the exact same day.
Which is just, that's wild.
It's unbelievable. The doctors on shift at Providence Hospital in Mobile, Alabama, they said they had never seen anything like it.
I bet it completely defies our standard understanding of human fragility. A medical anomaly of that magnitude, it really forces you to reconsider where the line between physiology and willpower actually sits.
Yeah, and that anomaly happened in May 2026 to a man named James Albert Bosarge Jr.
Who often goes by Jimbo or JAB, right?
Yes, exactly. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring Bosarge's life, his plans, profound and now mission. It's all documented in his deeply personal Still Standing Trilogy and his really extensive catalog of verse.
That's a massive body of work.
It is. And today, our mission is to chart what he identifies as 3 paths of journey. We are going to trace a path from his profound vision straight through further hardships and system dripping right up to the miracle in 26.
What really stands out in these texts is how Bosarge processes on. He doesn't view these harrowing experiences as he systematically transforms them into resilience.
And walked out of the ER hours later, you really have to look backward.
You do.
Because you can't weather a Category 5 storm without a bedrock anchor already in place, right?
Absolutely not.
So for Bosarge, that structural integrity, it was forged decades earlier during a childhood experience at the Bayou La Batre Inlet in Irvington, Alabama. There's this local landmark known as Point of the Pines.
Right, the first pillar. According to his writings, he and his sister were out by the inlet when they witnessed this hyper-real transformative event.
Yeah.
They saw the sky literally part, and they observed the Messiah standing directly above the tree line.
Which is just wow.
Yeah, Bosarge describes this moment as his eternal waypoint.
But a single vision, even one that visceral and real, it can fade over a lifetime if it isn't reinforced.
Oh, for sure. Memory's a tricky thing.
Right. And the texts credit his mother, Kathleen Sweetness Bosarge Glass, for providing the daily framework to keep that waypoint alive. She instilled in him this incredibly durable metaphor of the true North Star.
Which is a metaphor that carries intense psychological utility. Let's look at his poem, titled The True North Star.
Oh, I love this one.
It's great. He writes, "When the canopy is thick and the path is thin, look up past the world where the shadows begin." And then he says, he doesn't drift with the tide or the wind in the pines. He's the anchor of heaven, the grandest of signs.
The imagery there is just so intentional because think about it. When you're lost in a dense forest at night, staring at the trees around you is a death sentence.
You'll just panic.
Exactly. You'll walk in circles. You have to look up past the canopy to find the one fixed point that ignores all the chaos happening on the ground.
And he maps this out literally in the text using celestial navigation. He describes the process of, following the pointer stars and counting 5 spaces out to Polaris.
It's so specific.
It is. The underlying mechanism here is astrophysics applied to human psychology. While the Earth spins frantically on its axis, causing every other star to appear to drag across the sky in these massive, dizzying arcs.
Right.
Polaris sits almost perfectly aligned with the Earth's celestial pole. From our perspective, it is the only star that stays completely still.
So how does internalizing that specific celestial mechanic prepare a young boy for the severe, really systemic traumas he's going to face later in life?
Well, it creates a permanent cognitive separation between a person's circumstances and their core identity.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
But when anchor celestial sense of safety is fixed completely outside of early like property, then the loss of those earthly things cannot destroy your foundation.
Oh, I see.
You expect the world to spin, you expect the storms and the shadows, but you know your anchor hasn't moved a single inch.
And having that fixed point in the sky is this beautiful poetic comfort, but its real utility is only tested when the ground beneath your feet completely collapses.
Exactly.
And that brings us into the second pillar of his life, which is his Job-like stripping. This wasn't just a run of bad luck, it was a highly orchestrated dismantling of his life.
It really was.
Starting with the loss of his family homestead at 9211 4 Mile Road in 2007.
Yeah, the documents describe a fraudulent foreclosure. But the mechanics of how it happened are what make it so devastating. He details a coordinated campaign of cyber tampering and intercepted mail through the Postal Service.
Think about the pure helplessness of that mechanism. You're trying to fight for your home, but the legal notices you need to mount a defense never arrive in your mailbox.
Right, because someone is intercepting them.
Exactly. Legally, the clock runs out on you, but you don't even know the clock is ticking. Yeah. You are essentially erased from the system while your physical property is legally siphoned away.
It's a systemic erasure that leaves a person entirely stripped of their former life. And if you fast forward to 2017, this stripping culminates in him being kicked out of a transition facility,
leaving him completely homeless on the streets of Birmingham.
Yeah.
He writes with such vivid, really haunting detail about sleeping under underpasses in 5 Point South and Bessemer. He focuses a lot on the Red Mountains of Birmingham.
The imagery there is powerful.
It is. He describes these ancient, iron-rich ridges as completely indifferent watchers, just staring down at his suffering. He makes a direct comparison between this season of his life and the biblical Job, sitting in the ash heap for 7 days in total silence.
And that theological comparison is vital for understanding his mindset. The story of Job isn't primarily about the physical pain of losing things.
Right.
It's about the deafening silence of the wilderness that follows. It's the psychological agony of having everything that isn't truly yours burned away, leaving only the bedrock. But the true spiritual furnace of this second pillar, the actual fire that forged his resilience, was ignited a few years prior, during his 2014 incarceration in the Mobile County Metro Jail and the Draper facility.
This is such a fascinating turning point. So it's January 22, 2014. He's inside the facility, and another inmate named Jason Derrick hands him a book. It's titled The Line of Light by Elaine Bates.
And reading a highly charged text like that in an environment of extreme sensory deprivation and stress, that can have profound psychological effects.
I can imagine.
For Bosarge, reading that book triggered what he describes as a massive divine illumination.
Yeah.
It offered a framework that validated the intense, invisible battles he was already fighting within his cell.
The way he documents this in his poem, As Two Lights Became One, it is incredibly visceral. He doesn't just describe a vague sense of peace. He describes being encased in a brilliant light with an, and this is a quote, electrical charge dancing on skin.
Oh.
The light was supposedly so intense that he found himself squinting even with his physical eyes completely squeezed shut.
We really have to consider the nature of a furnace in this context. A furnace doesn't just burn away impurities, it alters the molecular structure of what's inside. It hardens steel.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
In that cell, the text suggests Bosarge transitioned from a victim of circumstance into an active vessel. He actually documents an event where he delivered a demonically possessed inmate.
The sensory details he uses there are jarring. He describes the release of that evil spirit as sounding exactly like a tire going flat. A sudden, violent hiss of air in a concrete room.
It's intense. And in that hyper-compressed environment, the poetry he was writing ceased to be just a coping mechanism.
Right.
The pen became a tool of heavy spiritual warfare. He was writing verses designed to break the psychological and spiritual chains of the men incarcerated alongside him.
I have to pause here because reading the source material, there's a lot to wrap your head around for a modern reader.
For sure.
We are talking about descriptions of demonic possession, hissing spirits, blinding divine light. How do we reconcile this intense, almost medieval level of spiritual warfare with the highly operational, meticulously organized executive he becomes later in life?
It's a great tension to point out, but for Bosarge, those two realities are not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
In fact, one is the prerequisite for the other. We usually think that losing everything, your home, your freedom, your comfort, will permanently break a person's drive.
Right, that it destroys their purpose.
Exactly. But the texts argue that this absolute stripping was a structural requirement. If you think of a sculptor, the chisel isn't destroying the stone. It's violently removing everything that isn't the statue.
So the stripping forces the mission to become operational. Like if he stays comfortable in his family homestead on the coast, maybe the poetry just remains a private hobby.
Exactly the point. By placing him in the most desperate, isolated environments possible, the concrete cell blocks, the freezing pavement of Birmingham, he is stripped of any reliance on human systems.
Makes sense.
When you have no address, no phone, and the judicial system has actively failed you, your reliance on that true North Star has to become absolute. Absolute stripping creates absolute clarity. The spiritual warfare in the jail cell, that was his executive training.
Wow, that frames the third pillar perfectly. Because the spiritual furnace prepared his mind and his spirit, but the ultimate physical trial was still waiting for him.
Yeah.
The foreclosure, the homelessness, the jail cell, all of that was literally just the training ground for May 2026.
It was the physical manifestation of all the spiritual warfare he had been documenting.
So we are back in the ER at Providence Hospital. Bosarge has been shot in the head. And as we establish at the top of the deep dive, the biological reality of this injury should mean death or at least profound permanent disability.
Absolutely.
But he is treated, and he walks out the very same day.
And for Bosarge, the medical impossibility of this event was not just a stroke of statistical luck. He mapped this survival directly onto a specific scripture.
Psalm 118.17.
Yes. Which reads, "I shall not die, but live and declare the works of the Lord."
He draws a profoundly sharp distinction here. He notes that it is one thing to sit in a jail cell and read a scripture, trying to extract some comfort from the page. It's an entirely different reality to actually become a living verse.
Right. When you survive an event that the laws of physics and biology dictate should have ended your life, the text you've been reading is no longer theoretical. You embody the text.
Because he survived the headshot, he realizes the bullet was never meant to be the period at the end of his sentence. It was the starting gun for a race.
I love that analogy.
He writes this line that absolutely gave me chills. He says, "You cannot kill what God has not released."
That is the ultimate realization of invulnerability through purpose. The logic is that if your specific mission on this earth is not yet complete, then earthly hazards, no matter how physically catastrophic, they simply cannot stop you.
Think about staring up at those pale, fluorescent ceiling tiles in an ER at 3 a.m. with a bullet wound in your head. Most people would be deeply traumatized. Oh,
Paralyzed by the fragility of life.
exactly. But for Bosarge, that sterile hospital room was the exact moment he realized his survival demanded a massive public declaration. The poetry could no longer stay hidden in a notebook. A living verse cannot stay quiet.
Which leads us directly into the fourth and final phase of his journey, the harvest.
Yes.
He realized he had to take the poetry he forged in the absolute darkest corners of his life and project it onto the walls of the institutions that currently house the broken.
This is where we move from his personal, miraculous survival into his national deployment. The organization he built is called Hope in the Halls, which is the operational national outreach arm of Still Standing Enterprises.
And we really need to emphasize the scale of this deployment. We're talking about an enterprise valued at between $60 and $75 million. This is a highly systematic mass production pipeline for resilience.
The mechanics of the mission are just brilliant. He takes his 44-piece poetry catalog poems like The Living Testimony, Bend in the Road, and The True North Star, and brings them into hospitals, prisons, and recovery centers.
But he doesn't just print them on printer paper.
No. He refuses to just print them on cheap paper or hang them with thumbtacks. He has them framed in museum-quality brushed gold aluminum.
And that aesthetic choice does heavy psychological lifting.
How so?
When you walk into a sterile, culturally overlooked space like a hospital corridor or a concrete prison block and you encounter museum-quality art, it disrupts the environment. It signals to the patients or inmates that they possess inherent value. You are injecting high-level dignity into spaces that are systemically designed to strip dignity away.
That is so powerful. And he didn't stop with physical art either. He developed what he calls the Digital Kit V3.0. We don't have all the details on the earlier iterations, but version 3.0 features a specific interface for patients called the Patient Reflection and Action Step.
The user experience of that digital kit is a masterclass in cognitive behavioral pivoting. In an institution like a hospital or a prison, the entire bureaucratic system forces you to obsess over your past. You are constantly asked about your medical history, your criminal record, your past mistakes. The digital kit interrupts that loop.
Exactly. The prompt actively stops a patient from looking back at the trauma that put them in the bed and instead asks them to write down their reason to fight today. It forces them to articulate what they are holding on to.
By targeting major high-volume facilities, places like UAB Hospital, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and Providence, the very hospital he walked out of, he is maximizing the statistical probability of these cognitive interrupts happening.
His stated goal is so hyper-specific and deeply human. He writes about counting on a tired nurse finding one of his poems in a break room and using those words to comfort a silent, terrified patient.
Yeah.
Or a man in a halfway house looking up from the digital kit at 2 a.m. to actually find Polaris in the night sky. He took the isolation of his own ash heap and industrialized it into an actionable deployment of hope for millions of people.
Because knowledge and trauma survival are only fully realized when the lessons are extracted, packaged, and freely given to alleviate the suffering of someone else walking the same path.
Which brings this entire narrative right to your doorstep. Think about your own life. We all have these ash heap moments, periods of intense, unfair stripping where the ground falls out from under us and the legal, financial, or medical systems fail us.
True.
Bosarge didn't just survive his stripping, he used it to build a survival kit for others. What is the poetry you have written in the dark corridors of your own life? And more importantly, how can you frame it in brushed gold and hang it on the wall for someone else who is currently walking that exact same hallway?
It's the ultimate challenge of the Still Standing trilogy. The pain is mandatory, but the harvest is a choice.
Let's pull all these threads together. We started with a young boy looking up through the canopy at Point of the Pines, establishing a celestial anchor that no earthly storm could touch. We watched that anchor hold as he was systemically stripped of his property, forced onto the streets beneath the indifferent iron mountains of Birmingham, and pushed into the spiritual furnace of a 2014 jail cell where his pen became a weapon.
All of which culminated in the ultimate physical test in 2026. Surviving a gunshot to the head, defying every standard medical protocol, and walking out of Providence Hospital till an enterprise of hope.
His life stands as a living, breathing testament to the mechanics of resilience. When you are genuinely anchored to the true North Star, the earthly systems can spin out of control. They can foreclose on your house and lock you in a cell, but they cannot unmoor your core identity.
You cannot control the violence of the storm, but you maintain absolute jurisdiction over where you fix your gaze.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today, building on everything Bosarge accomplished. James Albert Bosarge Jr. spent the first half of his life learning how to navigate by the true North Star just to survive his own darkness. But by industrializing his survival through hope in the halls, he actually became the true North Star for thousands of strangers sitting terrified in hospital beds and prison cells.
Wow.
It asks you to consider your own trajectory. Once you have finally found your fixed point in the night sky and you have survived your Category 5 storm, whose night sky are you destined to illuminate? Remember that ER room at 3 a.m.? The jagged, chaotic line of a trauma monitor does not have to be the period at the end of your story. Sometimes that terrifying moment when the machinery of your life completely breaks down is exactly when the true light finally gets in.